to. We work very closely with the FDIC and the Federal Reserve, the NCUA on a regular basis. Again, all federal agencies. I don't expect our salary structure to be in line with the federal agencies. I don't really need it to be completely in line with them because we have a better quality of life and work-life balance for these folks. But when folks are able to double their salary or get $30,000 increases, when we're having our exit meetings with them, they're honestly choked up telling us that they want to keep working for us, but they just can't because they need to go and support a family. We had asked for $508,000 originally from the Office of Planning and Budget to raise those salaries to $50,000 and $60,000 respectively, to increase staffing, one examiner per the 4 districts, and add another person in our main office to help with the workflow. Ultimately, it was decided to take a staggered approach with that in stages, and so the request here today is actually kind of the first phase of that at 184. And again, that's 184,000. I know you're talking millions in a lot of your conversations here, but 184,000. Again, that is just to raise those salaries. And to give you some context on that, because there are no bank examiners elsewhere in the state, we don't really match up with other agencies. We match up with agencies in other states and federal level. If you look at North Carolina, that's probably our closest peer in terms of a banking department. They have $234 billion under supervision. We have $249 billion. They have BB&T. We have SunTrust, both comparable large institutions. They have 51 banks. We have 182. So we have 3 times the number of banks they do. We also have 54 credit unions that we regulate, some of which are in the billion-dollar size, Delta and Associated and such. North Carolina has a whole separate department that handles their credit unions in the state. They have 68 examiners. We have 62. So again, we have over 3 times the institution workload and an equivalent large institution to deal with. Their salary structure for their financial examiners is, lowest point is about $67,000. What I'm asking to do is move our 42 up to 50. Their senior financial examiner is $107,000. Ours is 48, and I'm trying to move it to 60. So again, we're not trying to be completely in line with North Carolina. We're not trying to be in line with the federal agencies. We're literally just trying to stop the hemorrhaging that we're currently experiencing in those positions for the folks that are doing the work in the field day in, day out. That's the sales pitch. When we went through the House subcommittee, they reduced the 184,000 down to 92. I'm not sure why they did that. Again, we're taking a multi-phase approach with this, hopefully over years, and we need the full 184 to get these salaries even remotely competitive, so that we can try to make up the difference with quality of life and work-life balance.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Let me just ask the question. How much would that, the 92, how much increase in the salary would that be? You're trying to get it from 42, you're trying to get 42 to 50?
42 to 50, okay. And 47 to 60.
60. But I'm saying when the House did it, it was down to like 8. How much, what does that represent?
Oh, when they cut it down to 92, I haven't run the numbers myself. I don't know if Tracy knows.
It would be around 40, from 42 to 46, and the other one would be around 47 to 52.
But you need the whole 184.
Even the 50 and 60 is not what I consider truly competitive. 50 and 60 matches a little bit better with the states surrounding us. Honestly, even Mississippi is paying their examiners higher than we are, and their portfolio is nowhere near the complexity or the size. We've lost a number of banks. That's been widely publicized over the years. Again, we're still a top 5 premier banking state in the country in terms of assets under supervision and number of institutions. And even though we lost 76 banks, a lot of those were acquired by other Georgia banks. And so they have grown in size and complexity, and they're dealing with loss share arrangements with the FDIC. And these are all topics and issues that we as a department have to deal with. As the senator was talking about risk focusing, we've pulled all those levers many years ago in terms of, only examining those that need it the most. Unfortunately, when 38% of your portfolio is in problem status, you have to go twice as often. We partner with the FDIC in the vast majority of these institutions, and we rely heavily on their staffing. Sometimes we send just the one person in charge, and they supply all the rest of the staff. And that hasn't gone unnoticed with the banks that we're visiting. And while we're not an advocacy group, we are a regulator. We're considered the more reasonable regulator, and they like dealing with the state as opposed to exclusively with the federal government. There's a little bit of a buffer. There's some give and take there, and we're a little more accessible, and we have decision authority that they don't have that's limited to Washington. But they've taken notice of that, and that is a major concern I get at any outreach group is, where are you guys? They're paying $21 million in fees and assessments, which are, in the law say are to fund a banking department. And our budget's around $11 million, and they want to know where we are and why aren't we showing up and why are we deferring to the FDIC. They do have a choice. I mean, they ultimately could be fed up with that and decide to go with a national charter, and that would put the OCC in charge, and then the state of Georgia would collect no fees or assessments at all. So again, I'd hate to be melodramatic, but we're a skeleton crew, and that middle group is about to snap. And we could actually start doing fiscal harm at this point if we don't try to build up that retention a little bit.
Okay. And a follow-up, Mr. Chairman. And so I guess your employees do 3 times as much work. Is that correct? Or?
Actually they do. When you look at what I call the management or quasi-management folks, we call them supervisory managers. The FDIC calls them case managers. They have 3 case managers for every 1 supervisory manager we have. We make up the difference because those people are career individuals here in Georgia. The FDIC is very transient, so their folks are coming from all over the country. So we have institutional knowledge, helps us stay up to speed quicker. When you're talking about examiner workforce, that's a 2-to-1 ratio, and they have the ability to borrow from other regions within the country to make up any shortfalls, whereas we're it.
Okay, so you train them, your employees train them, and they stay about 5 years or 3 years, or?
Yeah, it's in that. At this point, we're having a hard time keeping them the 3 years, and what's so crucial there is it takes 3 years to teach them how to do the job. There's no college degree in bank examining, so it's a training intensive and expensive proposition to get them up to 3 years, and then from 3 to 5 is when they really become productive for me out in the field, and we're losing them even before they get to the 3-year mark at this point. But the raise through the $184,000 is meant to focus on those folks that have been in the 3 to 5 year bucket.
Okay. Thank you.
Absolutely. Ms. Tragler, you were talking about the number of banks in North Carolina versus the number of banks in Georgia. Just did a quick Google search. Seems like our population is very similar. How in the world did we end up with almost 4 times as many banks as North Carolina?
We get that question a lot, and I'm a refugee from Alabama, so I don't know all the intimate history of Georgia, but I believe it came from the fact that we have many more counties than most states do, and then we had a law prohibiting the branching from one county to another. Now that, I think, went away in the 90s, or it's phased out in the 80s and the 90s and such, but I think it built up a history of having more institutions because of the inability to branch. And then the run-up, literally from just before the Olympics until 2005, it was, you basically had almost the population of Savannah moving to the metro area every year. And so there was a lot of demand for additional banks to fund the development that was going on in the Atlanta area. And we did an extensive we do an investigation prior to any kind of chartering of a new bank in conjunction with the FDIC. We do concurrent but separate reports for that. And time again, the growth was so strong during those years it could support additional banks, and they did up until the point where it didn't.
Yeah, I was going to say, you thought it supported them. Somebody thought it supported additional banks. I mean, of that growth run-up you were talking about, I bet you a lot of the growth in the number of banks occurred after that deregulation of branching. I mean, I think you're right. Having so many counties probably contributed to it, but the bulk of it was after that, the deregulation, and it seemed like everybody that could round up $100 was opening up a bank, and at some point it gets to where it's so competitive nobody makes money, and we end up with 70 or 80 banks in trouble.
Yeah, and they had record earnings right up until the point where we had the economic collapse. There's several barriers that normally occur. One is capital. Georgia was flush with capital, and any time a bank started to outgrow its capital, they were able to pass a hat over a long weekend and recapitalize for further growth. Liquidity is usually an issue. Deposit rates were so high in Georgia that we were able to draw money from across the country, so that funding barrier didn't get hit. And then, as far as lessons learned as a regulator, the last one was convenience and needs, and the way the department historically looked at it was if the community could support another bank, then it would lean towards approving it. And I think now I've learned the lesson is that we would need to look, does it truly need another bank? Is that community lacking banking services? And it's a big difference, so the verbiage sounds similar.
A final question, and this is sort of the same question that I had for Department of Audits. So if we were able to get you the $185,000 for recruitment and retention, you got any idea what that would do to your turnover rate?
I don't. Of course, it would not eliminate it completely. We lose people to retirement, not at that job level, but as people retire off one end, those are the folks that get promoted out. We also make changes when changes are needed. Like I say, we're a skeleton crew, and I can't afford to keep people on that don't understand how to do the job or not going to do the job, and we've had to terminate a few people, as painful as that was, just because I've got to keep the morale high of the few that are working hard. So it won't go away completely, but and I can't quantify it tangibly, but when we have exit interview after exit interview, they were happy with everything except the difference between what they could make elsewhere was overwhelming. And I definitely had the impression from a number of them that it didn't have to be the same number. They would have stayed for less money. They just, it's just when you're doubling your salary or $30,000, it's too much.
All right. You don't have any other questions, do you? We appreciate your time.
Thank you very much.
Yep. Mr. Secretary, your turn, buddy.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. Appreciate y'all's time this afternoon. First of all, I just wanted to say thank you for your recommendations in the amended budget with helping with the GTA support for our billings in the elections division with the way our elections calendar has changed and other things that we're dealing with. We certainly appreciate that. We also were very appreciative to the governor's budget for the big budget. We certainly appreciate not having to deal with any cuts in his budget for the first time since I've been in office, and certainly we appreciate the merit-based pay increase. That gesture means a lot to our employees who really over the last, since the 4 years I've been in office are really being asked to do more, and I know they appreciate that as well. We do, however, have concerns with the 15 budget based on the House reductions, and if you will, I'll talk a little bit about that and then give you some line items that y'all can look at. Basically, their budget passed out with a $2,331,000 reduction in state funds for the Secretary of State's office. It's our understanding that the intention of this is to replace these funds with retained revenue. Beginning in 2011, we began carrying over our retained revenue between years in an effort to start saving money for much-needed system improvements that we have in the agency. We believe that was a fiscally sound decision, as we would be able to save that money and use it on new information systems rather than having to come and ask for state funds for those projects. At the end of 2013, we submitted our reserve request to OPB and the Department of Audits, and it was approved as presented in the amount of $5.5 million under the respective code section. At this time, if you'll refer to your tracking documents, I'll walk you through the House changes and my concerns, and I'll just skip the statewide adjustments unless you all have any questions. Starting on page 12, line 301.4, our corporations division budget was reduced a little over $1.2 million, leaving a program that generates over $40 million of revenue every year with only $40,000 in state funds. While corporation generates a significant amount of revenue, we believe it is fiscally irresponsible to budget on an unstable source of revenue. We also believe it's unfair to use the fees that our constituents are paying to fully fund this program. And the reason that our constituents are paying these fees is to receive expedited services, not for that money to be used to pay for other things in state government. Because our system is inefficient, more and more constituents are paying expedited fees to speed up their registration and renewal process. This has produced an unprecedented amount of retained revenue in 2013, which we held over and intended to use for a down payment on a new IT system, which is why we were saving the money in the first place. On line 303.4, the office administration budget was reduced by $285,000. We believe that this cut was made erroneously, as the administration currently only has reserves of a little over $10,000, almost $11,000. That was 303.4 administration. So there was a $285,000 cut when we only have current reserves of a little over $11,000. We believe the cut is comprised of other funds that will be transferred to the Georgia Archives and the Georgia Government Transparency and Campaign Finance Commission in 2014. The process of transferring these funds has been occurring since the 2013 audit was finalized. The reserves for these two programs were never incorporated into our base budget or available for operating funds. We knew all along that these monies would transfer, per the legislation that passed that we actually, as you know, supported. We have provided the transfer documents to our analysts and can provide any supplemental information, such as a timeline of the transfer, if you would like. In 304.4, that's our professional licensing boards. There was a reduction of almost $600,000. The current balance of professional licensing board retained revenue reserves is a little over $1 million. I will have you note that we're seeing less revenue being retained in 2014 than the previous 4 fiscal years. Our mid-year revenue is down 21% from 2010 and 32% from FY11. Like in corporations, our intentions with the PLB retained revenue was to purchase a new licensing system. We are also contemplating consolidating both of these systems together, our corporations and licensing, into one to further improve our efficiencies. The current licensing system has been in place since 2002 and is in need of either upgrading or replacing once we've completed our due diligence and research on the new system. there are many days that our system will go down or will run slow, and it leaves our staff basically sitting at their desk twiddling their thumbs till we can get the system going back up. So that's something that we've been, having issues with, that we've got IT people looking at now, but we just haven't quite finished the due diligence to try to figure out whether we need to upgrade or move to a completely new system. In 305.4, our securities division was reduced by almost $186,000. The securities retained revenue is very unpredictable depending on what kind of cases are going on around the country. Our current reserve amount is only $220,000, which is primarily from 2 large settlements way back in 2012. Our FY11 retained revenue was only $429. In this fiscal year, we've only retained less than $7,000. So you can see that it swings wildly depending on whether there's a national securities case. A couple of years ago, there was a big case with Morgan Keegan that I believe the state of Mississippi dealt with that had, a national settlement. So we got a piece of that, and that doesn't always happen every year. So that retained revenue is, it's very hard to figure out what it's going to be from year to year, and that's why we don't try to budget on the back of that. And I will note too that the existing reserves that are talked about being used in the House budget would only supplement our program for 1 year. And then lastly, in line 357.26, the $3 million bond, we certainly are appreciative of the efforts to bond money to assist with the implementation of a new information system at our licensing division. But as I mentioned earlier, we while we'll be ready for that one day, we are just not there yet. We have had a lot on our plate in our IT division, implementing our new voter registration system, which we're still working on, and a couple of other projects that we have, and we just have not, we don't have the staff to do all of these things at one time. So we're having to kind of pick our projects as we move along, try to reserve and save the money where we don't have to ask for state funds, because quite honestly, there haven't been any in the last few years to ask for. And we just really need to do some more due diligence where we could thoughtfully come to you and say, we know that this system will cost in this range. We know that it's better for us to upgrade our current system, or the recommendation may be that we need to get rid of our old system and just go to a completely new system. But that's something that, we just do not know yet, because we haven't done the due diligence, and that's the reason that we haven't asked anybody for it, even though we were saving and planning to try to be able to pay for that without asking you for the money. And with that, I'll be glad to answer any questions you may have. I know it's fairly in-depth.
And sort of go backwards, I guess, reference to the bond and the monies that you had reserved to go towards IT systems. I heard what you said, that you weren't quite ready to make that purchase yet, but I guess likewise, utilizing those reserves, since you weren't going to spend them yet, utilizing them doesn't necessarily cause an immediate problem, but it's a different way of going about what you kind of your master plan.
Well, I think the issue that we have is that, as we have gotten budget cuts over the years, one way we've made up for those cuts is, instead of, sending people a nice wall license for them to hang, as part of their licensing fees, we had to cut that out, and we now charge them to do that. So when they pay that fee, we retain that revenue, and we've used that money to help offset for budget cuts. I'll remind the committee that, a couple of years ago, we bought new cars in our agency with this retained revenue that people were paying in fees, because we didn't get money from the state bonded for cars like other law enforcement agencies. So I fundamentally, I don't think you can take fees to use as state funds, number one. And number two, it's just not right you know, when we raised fees on corporations in 2009, when the legislature did that, so now our working Georgians are paying double what they were to register a corporation. And now you're talking about with the reductions that we got in the House budget, that all of that fee money they're paying, plus all of the money they're paying to get a registration expedited or some other service that they're paying for, which gives us the money to provide that service, to be able to hire temporary employees to do that type work and to process that. You're now saying that you're going to take all that money and use it to spend on, you know, on something else, on a licensing system or wherever it's going in state government. I just fundamentally think that's wrong. I mean, I think it's the duty of the state, in my opinion, to fund an agency to be able to do the work that it has before it. And our corporations division brings in over $40 million a year, and our budget after the House cut is going to be $40,000. So it'd be hard for me to go back to my customers and say, you know, I'm charging you $100 for you to expedite a filing that you can get done in, you know, a day and a half, but then also have to explain to them that when you pay that money, it's going to go to buy a licensing system in another program of our budget.
Last year we passed Senate Bill 160 of dealing with all the new documents required for licensing and what have you. How has that impacted?
It's been a huge impact. I actually talked to a lady I know in Athens today that has been in the heating and air business for I don't know how many years, and she said, you know, I went online and paid my licensing fee back in November on the internet, but I didn't realize that you could also email your documents in, so I mailed those, and she goes, my license still says it's pending. So we went in and checked on that today and found, you know, one of the person's documents. The other ones we don't have because they didn't send them together. And you can imagine, you know, we're having to do this for 500,000 people. We got documents flying around everywhere, and we've been dealing with that for almost 2 years. We were very thankful for y'all's support last year in helping us, put into the code that we only have to do this one time when people renew, not every 2 years. And we're almost to the end of that cycle. So, but it's been a huge impact. And that's one of the things that we've had to use some of the retained revenue is to hire temporary workers to do all that work. Because when we got this, basically an unfunded mandate, we got no money to deal with that. I mean, our renewal times went from being overnight. Basically, you go online, you did your renewal, your electronic payment. Less than 24 hours later, you would show up in our system as having renewed your license. To that process, a year ago, was taking us almost 20 days. Now, we're down to about, I think, last report I got was 6 to 10 days, so it's much better. But still, for people that have been licensed for a long time, when they're used to being in the system the next day and it's taking 6 to 10 days, we get a bunch of extra phone calls from people going, did you lose my application? You took my credit card payment, but I'm not showing up in the system, which has jammed our phone lines, which has caused all kind of problems in all of our agency. But we are thankful that we're almost through that. We should be done with that in the next couple of months.
All right. We could have a question coming in the room right here now. I think that's all, Mr. Secretary.
Okay.
Thank you for your time.
Thank you.
Mrs. Inspector General.
Good afternoon.
It's all yours. Just, if you will, identify yourself for the committee.
I am Deborah Wallace, Interim Inspector General since early October. our agency, the mission of our agency is to investigate waste, fraud, and abuse in the 86 executive branch agencies, and to train in order to help prevent fraud as well. In addition to the two line items, 171.1 and 171.2 that are across the board for the agencies, we have one additional request. That is 171.3 to increase funds for personnel for one investigator position for the total amount of $52,045.
Any questions by members of the committee? How many investigators have you got now?
At this moment, we have 3. We have just gotten approval. We've made a hiring decision for a 4th one who will begin on March 3rd, and this one would make our staff complete with 5.
Tell us just a little bit about the workload in your office. I realize you
Okay.
just kind of stepped into this role, but the workload for the office over the last few years, how's that?
Well, it's been a challenging increase. The content of the cases have become more complex, which takes more time. We have, over the course of the last 10 years or so, the office has been in existence 11 actually, and I've been there since 2003, so I feel, really good about talking with you about the trend. The cases have become more complex, particularly in the last 2 or 3 years. More white-collar fraud, comprehensive cases that take longer to do. It's not something you can necessarily do overnight. Because we have just been working with 3 investigators, we have had to learn to leverage our resources, and we work really well with our partners. That would be the Attorney General's Office, the Georgia Bureau of Investigation, our federal colleagues in Atlanta-based offices of Inspectors General, such as Department of Labor, U.S. Department of Labor, or Education. I did bring, and I provided it to Matthew, an annual report for you. I brought one in hard copy, but I'd be glad to provide electronic copies or hard copies for others. And it details our work more for 2.5 fiscal years, most recently.
All right. Thank you. Any other questions? If not, thank you for your time.
Well, if you do have any afterwards, please, we'd love to talk with you, and we'll answer anything that we can. We thank you for your consideration.
Thank you. Okay. Mr. Sowers? I see you sitting back there, and I figured you didn't come just to watch the show, so you got something you'd like to share with us?
I enjoy watching shows, but I am here to provide you with the information you probably want. I'm John Sowers. I'm the administrator of the Governor's Office of Consumer Protection. Our budget is rather simple and straightforward. There are 2 cuts in there, which are fairly significant, but they are because of measures we initiated. And let me explain. For some years, we were tasked with the oversight, and I'm sorry, I'm at items, this is 169.100. we were tasked with the oversight of the 1-800-Georgia call center, which was not organically part of our office and was not part of our basic mission. Effective September 1 of 2013, that responsibility was transferred back to the GTA, which is where it had been in previous years. We, therefore, are transferring out, if you will, or cutting from our budget the money that it would take to operate the call center. That's what is reflected in the main there. There's a second item which reflects elimination of 3 positions which were not in the call center directly but were an adjunct to it. The call center had 15 operators and a supervisor. In addition, there were 3 people who assisted agencies of the state government or of any county or city government who wanted them to operate, update, initiate, or whatever, call centers of their own, so-called Class 2 call centers. Those 3 positions are being eliminated. In fact, they were eliminated in the continuation budget. They will go out of existence as of April 1, and those 3 people will have to make other arrangements for employment. So that is reflected, that's the other thing that's being taken out of our budget. Everything else remains the same as the continuation budget and as passed by the House. Let me add one thing, if I may. I want to thank you all, and I need to thank your House colleagues as well, for what you did last year for us. You added $100,000, raising to $500,000 the amount it takes us to administer the Lemon Law program. The wisdom of your having done so, I think, was acquitted by the fact that in the course of last year, we generated almost $700,000 in revenue from the fees that come in through that program. We also processed almost 800 cases. Last year's total of arbitration awards and settlements was over $13 million, which is an all-time record. So the Lemon Law program is growing and is working very well. And the addition of that $100,000 has allowed us to keep up with it and to maintain our goal, which is in the statute, that we complete cases within 40 days of the time a hearing is initiated. And we were able to do that last year in just under an average of just under 37 days. So that probably wouldn't have been possible if we had not received those additional funds. So we put them to good use, and they produced a good result. If you have any questions, I'd be pleased to answer them. I must have bored everybody else to tears, but thank you very much. I appreciate it.
Concludes our hearings. We appreciate you all coming and participating in our little show.